whether it's in a year's time, 2 years' time, 5 years' time, and it needs to be relevant as best as possible when that time comes along. And if you're only doing something that's only relevant now, down the line, when it's not relevant, you're actually not going to get any money back. And as people are aware, house prices haven't moved dramatically and increased. That in some instances they've gone down, 10%. In areas and that. So the value of your house is very important to your exit strategy when you're going to sell. So it's nice to do renovations, but one also needs to think, if I'm going to sell, am I going to get the full extent of this renovation out, and am I going to get my money back? Because you might spend 100, 200, 300,000, whatever that amount is, but you might not be getting it back in value of the house. So your builder should be able to assist you with that, maybe not exact, and maybe you need to get an estate agent also involved and say, if we do renovations, how is this going to put me in our area, and how is that going to affect the value of our house? Is it going to be a good thing, or is it not going to be a good thing? Because if you're not going to get huge value out of it, then you're only doing it for your own benefit and your own enjoyment, which is fantastic, but you've got to be able to get a return on your money. And for the property investors, that's an important part of, increasing one's wealth. So we have to take all those things into consideration.
And you've said quite a bit that I want us to chew on a little bit. I think one of the things that you mentioned, and I want to highlight it because I know a lot of us do this, is how some of the changes that you might want to make in your house might be in fashion right now, and they're very distinct, right? It's not one of those things that are relatively timeless, where even in, let's say, 5 or 7 years, it doesn't seem off. They are very era specific, that when you do put that on, some people may not necessarily like it. And I think one of the things is thinking through, when you know that you may potentially, for example, want to sell your property, you're putting something that is then that distinct rather, is going to potentially hamper, the sale of your property. And it's such an important thing. I mean, I'm renovating, and I was having that conversation with my mom, and because there's some work that we're doing, and I was like, look, with certain things, we want to just make sure that it's going to be timeless. In 5-7 years time, we know we're not going to want to change anything, so we still need to be happy with how it looks. So even the pieces that we're slowly kind of thinking of, and the various things that we're looking at, we want to make sure we don't choose something that is too distinct, and that probably in a year or two, either comes out of fashion, or we also get over it quite quickly. So that's something that's so important. But I want to actually ask you about budget, because I think budget is obviously a pressure point on both ends, right? I typically, get a lot of quotes from different service providers before I do a job. And sometimes I'll go on, the websites of the various, warehouses, and I'll even go to the shops physically, and I'll get a relatively good sense of what certain products would cost. I think one of the things with COVID is prices have gone up quite substantially with the service providers. But unfortunately, not everybody at home does that exercise. And not everybody at home, wants to even do that exercise. But sometimes you may, for example, say you've got 20,000 rands, but you want to upgrade, let's say, your bathroom. And it's a relatively big bathroom, or some of the finishes that you want are relatively expensive. How do we almost, I'll say, adjust our expectations effectively? And how can contractors also be good at that? Because what I found, Alun, is that a contractor will say, okay, you've got 20,000. They'll tell you, they'll take the job, and I'll say halfway through, when essentially the budget has run out, your bathroom is now essentially upside down, then they'd be like, well, they need their portion, obviously. You still need XYZ material, and let's say that XYZ material is like an additional 8,000, and that's now completely knocked off your budget. So how do we almost expectation manage the budget component? Because I know our pockets are not, endlessly deep, and you probably do want great finishes to your home, but we have to find a way of kind of meeting each other halfway as much as possible.
Sure. I think that any good contractor will be able to advise any client as to where budget should be. So if, as your example is using the bathroom, I think that if the PC items, which is your bath, your taps and all of that, come to a certain amount. So, if you've allocated that 20,000, that the taps, you need to be sort of on the lower end of the scale of purchasing your materials, because it doesn't matter whether you're putting in a 2,000 Rand or 1,000 Rand bath, or whether you're putting in a 10,000 Rand bath, the labor is still the same. And there's a labor component to every aspect. So if a bath, as an example, costs 2,000 Rand to install, it doesn't matter whether you bought the 10,000 Rand bath, it's still 2,000 Rand to install. And as you add that labor up, you will soon see that 20,000 maybe is not realistic. And it's at that point, that's why you need to get a couple of quotes on that, and you need to understand them in detail, because if you are just changing a cosmetic change in a bathroom and you're doing no extensive plumbing work or anything like that, then that might work. If you are doing that, that's not going to work. And if you've got a really old bathroom, you've got old piping in the wall, you've got to change that piping. And if the contractor's not advising you correctly, I think that's where the expectations are not being managed correctly, because unfortunately with any project, there's always little gremlins that come into it. And there's always something that's hidden that one can't see into the walls, or all of a sudden the ceiling is in poor condition, or whatever it happens to be. And you go, this needs to be done, and this is going to cost an extra 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 Rand. And if the client doesn't have a sort of contingency plan, that is where the fighting really starts, and that because you're not getting the project that you want done for the project that you or the budget that you thought it was going to be, and you're now looking for money that has put you in a financially not in a great position, because you need to get that one bathroom done to be able to be functional. You can't leave it unfinished or anything like that. And I think if everybody at the beginning, when you're doing the pricing and that you get that correct, the project will always go smoothly. I think it's when you're on that tight budget and you're just trying to just get in, rather delay the project. Doesn't matter what it is, save up a little bit more, because things inevitably cost a little bit more than what you're thinking. And if you've got that little bit of a cushion, you don't feel under pressure, and you don't, and that anxiety levels are then kept to a minimum, because construction, doesn't matter what you're doing, is always a problem, and that it's very stressful, and people don't always think there's not as much dust, there's whatever it happens to be, and it gets in everywhere. And if something does go wrong, you don't want it to start putting a sour taste in your mouth. And I think that's where those frustrations come in, because when one thing goes wrong, usually something else goes wrong very soon afterwards, and that sort of gets, and then the relationship sort of sours very quickly, and it's always the builder's fault, and it's not always the builder's fault. There is obviously a lot of issues where builders cause on themselves, but I think that if that's managed correctly, I think that most projects can be successfully completed.
And Alun, and I know I've asked this of you and even other guests, but I want to bring it up because, as you're saying, sometimes it's the builder's fault, sometimes it's actually not the builder's fault, because I've been on client side, but I've also worked with enough contractors to also know that there are instances where, a client will want a certain thing and that doesn't quite work out given, the nature of their property, and they'll still insist that they probably want the thing. Some contractors are able to almost expectation manage you well and say, listen, the picture that you're sharing, this is how that property is likely configured. It may not work that well with your property. Perhaps let's try it like this. But unfortunately, not every contractor does that, because as we're saying, some will do the job, and chances are in the weeks or months or years to come, it may, fall apart quicker than it should have, because it shouldn't have been put in the first place. So for viewers at home who are looking then to, get a contractor, what are some sort of, I'll say, key questions should they ask of their contractors to also assess that this is a good contractor that they can work with, and a contractor who will also be able to be upfront with them about certain challenges with the project, and if they want X, will be able to effectively communicate with them to say, listen, this actually isn't going to work, as opposed to just doing the job and keeping it moving and thinking this will be their problem. I'll be long gone by the time this falls apart.
I think that for most contractors that are good, and that they usually have registered companies, they usually VAT registered, they usually belong to some organization like the NHBRC, one of those. And I think that if you get those in place and that they carry insurance, all of those sort of things are sort of things that need to be checked off, because as an example, if a contractor doesn't carry insurance, you as the property owner are liable if anything should happen to any of those contractors on your property, because you take the responsibility, and that's not what should be happening, and that contractors should carry their own insurances and that type of thing. And I think that sort of shows whether the contractor is a good contractor or whether they're not a good contractor. It doesn't mean that sometimes the work that other contractors don't do is not good. It just means that they're taking care of their clients by making sure that they have got certain things in place, so that that responsibility doesn't fall on the client. And I think that's key to making sure that projects are successful, because if those things happen and something does go pear-shaped, or someone dies or whatever, anyone can fall off a ladder or anything can happen. If those things are taken care of, the client knows that you're looking after their best interest. If you don't have those things in place, you're sort of saying, you know what, I really don't care. I'm only caring about the money at the end of the day. And yes, money is important to every contractor, but it's also important to look after your client, because you want repeat business and you want referrals. And I think you need to establish that from the beginning. And if you do that, and make sure that your contractor is looking after you and got your best interest at heart, I think that generally you can have successful projects going forward, most probably 95% of the time. And I think that's the key, because if your projects are successful, you feeling great, your product it looks nice at the end of the day, and you can actually show it off to your friends. Otherwise, you're feeling you've got that sour taste. You don't want to invite friends to, and always friends say, I told you not to do this, I told you not to do that. And you're already being judged by your friends and that for not taking certain precautions. And I think those can be avoided, and your relationships can be kept intact by just being a little bit more prudent and making sure that you tick off all those boxes, and that no red flags are, showing, and that if a red flag or if the price is too good to be true, it always is, and things will always go wrong. And especially in this time where things are really tight, as you mentioned, I think that you've got to make sure you're dealing with someone that's got integrity, that is looking after your best interest, because otherwise you're not going to see them. Your project is not going to get completed, or it's going to be completed at a poor standard, and you're still going to have to redo things, and that which is not what you wanted to do from the beginning.
I'm this evening in conversation with Alun Ferreira, who's a director at Anchor Property Group. We're taking your questions and comments as we look at what to consider if you are going to be renovating this year. I also want to hear from you at home. This time last year, we were having our first broadcast of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzamantungwa Kumalo. I want to hear from you at home. Were you watching that first episode? If you were not, what was the first episode then that you started watching of the podcast? We absolutely love hearing from you. And as promised, we definitely are going to be celebrating our 1 year birthday in style, and we're going to keep you posted on how you at home can get involved with that. Now, to go to our questions and comments, I see we've got a comment on Facebook coming from Unikiwe Dlamini saying, I've just recently renovated my bathroom and it cost more than I had thought it would. The material alone is expensive, and then there are minor hiccups in the final product of my envisioned bathroom. I've had this nightmare as well. And Ellen, I mean, it happens so often that you sometimes have, as a client, you want to do X and you've probably got all these, you've got your vision, or you might have some of the pictures, and then you realize just how expensive things are. I think, bathroom and kitchen, we always talk about how expensive those two specific rooms tend to be when you're renovating them.
I think that, if you're feeling, like this project didn't get to where it should have got, and maybe the finishes weren't as nice or, that the client was expecting, I think the problem also is that if you see something that you feel in your gut is not going according to plan, I think take a break, get somebody in, get a different contractor in, get a property inspector in, whatever the case may be is, and get an opinion on where the project is, because you can correct a lot of mistakes if you just pause for 5 minutes and just say, guys, we just need to take a small time out. We need to just check that we're on track, and so that you can make sure that your project does go in the right direction. I think that we're too quick to want to get things finished as quickly as possible. And yes, every contractor wants to finish as diligently and as quickly as possible. But I think that when things are going pear-shaped and your gut is telling you something is wrong here, rather stop it, rather seek professional advice from an independent person and see that everything is going according to plan, because you can then rectify those things at a minimal cost usually, than having to do major repairs when the tiles are all skew, or if the plumbing is not done right, or whatever, that you're not having to break down everything you've done to repair things. And I think that there's no sin in actually just taking a little bit of a break and saying, guys, we just need to get another opinion here and that. And whether the person likes it or not doesn't matter. It's putting your mind at rest as the client, and you need to be at peace about your project, because otherwise, if something does go wrong, you're going to think, I should have stopped it earlier. I could have, and you didn't. So don't feel that you're doing something wrong. It's your property. It's your project. Stop it. Get professional advice in, and then move forward with the project. And make sure that if you need someone to police them or whatever, that you get that person in. Yes, it might cost you a little bit to have to do that, but you know what? The project is more important, and the correctness of it, than having things go wrong, and it's going to cost you 3 or 4 times more expensive to do those repairs.
I've actually had that before, Alun. I was doing tiling it was in this property actually, and basically the contractor didn't square the apartment properly, and they started it in the bedrooms, and a part of me was like, okay, what's happening here? It wasn't going quite well, and then they were now in the lounge. It just happened that another contractor that I've done other work with then came in, and they saw how badly it was essentially being squared, and they saw what was happening in the bedrooms, and we're now essentially approaching the lounge, and they were like, no, they need to take all of this out and start the squaring at the door. They had started it in the middle of the apartment, and that's why everything was sort of haywire. And I mean, now I have a proper lounge kitchen that's adequately squared. Had they gone through and put it in, and I left those tiles in, the apartment looked very skew. And I think in as much as I had to ask them to take it out and had to buy extra bags of cement, rather than having a house that looks and feels skew, where even putting your furniture is going to be a challenge, and should I want to sell it or rent it out, everybody's going to look at the floor and think, what was happening here? And I mean, you already spent so much money on buying tiles, buying all the material, only for them to do that. So I certainly do urge you at home, if something seems off, get somebody in very quickly so that you're able to adequately deal with it. And then before I let you go, any final tip for our viewers at home who are going to be doing their renovations this year?
I think the most important thing is the budget. I think that if you can get that right, and you make sure that your money is right and where you're going, a good contractor will always help you to save money in the right areas, and to advise you on where to go and get certain products depending on what you're looking at better prices, because usually they can get better prices and that in some areas and they can advise you on what to do best. And I think if you're not sure or if you're feeling uncomfortable with a contractor, I think it's rather step aside and say, you know what, I don't think this is the right fit for us, and choose a different contractor. And as we've just been discussing, if something's going pear-shaped, get it inspected, get it checked out, and make sure that those corrections can take quick. Yes, it might cost a little bit, but it's not going to cost you what it did if it was picked up much later and you can't actually repair it and you're having to literally do the whole renovation again. So I think those are the main points in that. And the last one is just to make sure that it stays relevant. Try and do something different. Don't do cookie cutter all the time. A good contractor will know the trends, what are happening around the world and that, to make sure that it's going to last you the next sort of 5 to 10 years and that. And I think that's also key, and that it's no good trying to do 1980s style when we're in 2021. We need to get current trends that are going and things that are going to carry you forward, so that should you want to sell your house, it's in a very saleable position and people want it and say, gee, that was a great renovation, and they want to buy it up. And that maximizes your return on the projects that you are doing.
Thank you very much there, Alun. And as we wrap up the show, we've got a comment here from Uponzo and Jinye, who says, private property, I only discovered you guys in December when you were talking about levies and services. Well, Uponzo, thank you so much for tuning in. I've seen some of your comments in the past few weeks, and we definitely do love hearing from you at home. Well, as we wrap up our 1 year since being on your screens every single weekday, we certainly do want to say thank you so much for the year. We're going to bring you many more great episodes in the coming days, in the coming weeks, and the coming months. And we certainly do enjoy engaging with you every single day. So do keep the love coming and the comments coming and the suggestions coming, because we also know that we are of service to you and making sure that we make your property journey, regardless of where you are in your property journey, as smooth and as seamless as possible. So thank you very much to you at home. Alun, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I know we're definitely going to have you again soon. It's always so great talking property with you.
Thanks for having me. Chat to you soon.
Thank you very much. And that's Alun Ferreira, who's a director at Anchor Property Group. Well, that's it from me at home. I think it's been such a great show this evening as we reflect on, certainly I've been reflecting off air on the 1 year of being on the show and the growth that we've experienced on the show. And we're quite excited for where the show is going and making the show even bigger than what we've currently made it. So thank you very much for making that possible for us at home. And we do look forward to bringing you more great content, more guests, and different ways that we can all learn about property and make sure that we make good property decisions. From myself, Zamantungwa Khumalo, and the rest of the Private Property Podcast team, thank you very much for tuning in. And as usual, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.
Hi, I'm Jared Siegel. I'm a local restaurateur and the owner of Jared's Espresso Bar and Eatery in Sea Point. I'm a Cape Town local, Camps Bay born and bred, and I've been living in Sydney, Australia for the last few years. Living abroad, I've always been drawn to the mother city, and I've recently decided to come back home. Taking lifestyle factors into consideration, Bantry Bay has been the perfect fit for me. Living on the Atlantic seaboard really resonates with what I'm all about. From the active lifestyle, the amazing food culture, its family-friendly environment, and amazing natural beauty, the quality of life we have on offer is really unique. The Atlantic seaboard has some of the most beautiful suburbs in the country. With areas like Camps Bay and its world-renowned beach culture and the recent refurbishment of Sea Point Promenade, it's no wonder our neighbourhood has such a global appeal. After a long day of hard work, there's nothing better than taking a walk along Clifton Beach, sharing a moment and watching the sunset. Trying to offer something authentic to the community, I'm not about reinventing the wheel, just doing the classics really well. And this is my neighbourhood.